Hi, and welcome to the second week of our Advent study on the four great themes of Christmas: hope, peace, love, and joy. We're in Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 18. Go ahead and be turning there. Now, last week we lit the candle of hope. This week we turn our attention to the theme of peace, P-E-A-C-E. I've had several people ask me about the order of the lighting of the candles. They've said, our church also lights Advent candles, but they go in a different order. It's hope, peace, love, and joy, but the order is different from what you're doing or from what I've seen other churches doing. What's the deal? Well, truth be told, I've asked everyone I can think to ask, and I can't find a consistent answer to this question. When I do, I'll pass it on to all of you. And if you know that you know what the right answer is regarding why there are four clear-cut themes to the Advent season, but the order that they're celebrated, the order they're taught on, differs from church to church and denomination to denomination, I'd appreciate it if you'd pass it on to me. My email is author, A-U-T-H-O-R, authorbearmills@gmail.com. Now, there was another question emanating from last week's lesson on Matthew 1, verses 1 through 18. Matthew says there were 14 generations from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. And the question was, Bear, you said this is actually not a comprehensive list, but more of a greatest hits and worst misses that summarizes the various generations. And then they ask, how do we know that Matthew didn't mean this is the comprehensive list? Well, first, it's hard to overestimate how important genealogies were to people in Palestine in that day. As our friend Dr. Michael Dane says, family and personal honor in that day was either acquired or ascribed. So everybody had to prove their worth and their honor by who their ancestors were. This was a day and time when the Jews were really downtrodden to an extreme degree. So genealogies that established who you were because of who your great-great-great-great-grandfather was were so important. And because everyone knew their genealogies, everyone knew there were way more than 42, 3 times 14, way more than 42 generations from Abraham to that day. Therefore, Matthew wasn't trying to fool anybody by listing 14 generations, then 14 generations, and then 14 more generations. Now, there are several theories about what was going on here. First, Matthew says flat out, there are 14 generations. So we naturally ask, there are where? Well, Matthew's answer is, there are here in my summary. 14, 14, and then 14. Not there are in the actual genealogy, but there are here in my summary 14, then 14, and then 14 more to make it very easy and orderly to remember. Another line of thought is that Matthew, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, chose 14 because that is the numerical equivalent to the name David, as in King David in the Hebrew language. See, Hebrew letters corresponded with numerical values. And in Hebrew, the letters D, V, D, remember there are no vowels in Hebrew, equal the number DVD equals the number 14. And 14 in Jewish understanding was perfection doubled. 7 is the number of perfection, so 14 is perfection doubled. So even though Jesus comes from the boonies, he's an ancestor of David, and he's perfection doubled times 3, because there's 3 lists of 14 names. And of course, for these Jews in the emerging faith called Christianity, 3, as in 3 times 14, is important because 3 represents the Trinity: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Last week we said there was so much depth in this list of names, this genealogy. And I think this shows us further how true that is. By the way, if you missed last week, go back and watch it on YouTube or listen to it on our podcast. You can find our podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, or at authorbearmills.com. That's AUTHOR. I think it's right there on your screen, authorbearmills.com, and then just simply click on the podcast tab. Now, that brings us to the second week of Advent and looking at the peace of Christmas, a peace which surpasses all natural human understanding. But what we're going to see is that these were anything but peaceful times or circumstances that are portrayed in Matthew 1. Let's look starting in verse 18. This is how the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph, but before they came together, she was found to be pregnant through the Holy Spirit, because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace. He had it in his mind to divorce her quietly. You know, it would be very fair to say that Joseph's entire world was falling apart. He and Mary hailed from the tiniest of tiny towns. He's been among the most right-living, devout Jews anybody's ever known. He's a hard-working, honorable, blue-collar laborer. And now he's engaged to the girl in the village with the most upstanding reputation you could ever desire. Then comes the news that she's pregnant. Well, he knows he didn't do it. To pretty much anybody, that means either one of two things. Either she was raped or she's been unfaithful. Now, if she was raped, it's up to her family to seek retribution, but nothing's happening on that front. That leaves only one other possibility as far as Joseph can see. Mary was unfaithful to him. What we need to see is that Joseph, as a righteous man, can take one of two avenues. He can pursue the law and order approach. You have embarrassed me, Mary, and now it's my turn to completely humiliate and destroy you and your reputation. Or he can say, even though it appears that I've been really wronged here, I'm going to show mercy. I'm going to show grace. I'm going to be sensitive to the feelings and reputation of the person who I believe with all my heart did me wrong. How many times in our world do we hear, you know what, you be good to me, and if you're good to me, well, I'll be good to you. But that's not what we see in Joseph. He's good to Mary, even when he's utterly convinced she did him wrong and sullied both her reputation and his. Verse 20, but after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Joseph considered, he contemplated, he worried, he wondered, he hurt, he prayed. No one would have blamed him if he felt completely humiliated. But after he considered all the different angles, then an angel comes to him saying, hey, Joe, listen, what I'm about to tell you is going to blow you away. But you can have peace in this situation because God has got this. Even after you'd thought, even after you'd considered everything, God's got this in a way that you never could have imagined. What's the lesson for us? Give it to God. Lord, I can't figure out how this situation I'm facing is ever going to work out right, but I'm giving it to you. And I'm calling it a night. I'm going to bed. Notice also the courage of Joseph. The angel says, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. That means Joseph was afraid of what would happen to his reputation if he went ahead and married her. You know, doing the compassionate thing, the merciful thing, it takes courage. Don't be afraid, Joe, to do the right thing. God is on your side when you're showing mercy. Verse 22, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had said through the prophet. Verse 23, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded, and he took Mary home as his wife. But he did not consummate their marriage until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. I don't know what you're facing right now in your life, your family, your work, your finances, but I do know that the same God who let Joseph know, hey, Joe, trust me, be compassionate, be at peace, and watch me work, is saying the same thing to us today. God's getting ready to do something incredible for those who trust him and live rightly, righteously before him, even when it seems like there's nothing good that can come from your situation. And therefore, we can light the candle of peace, not just on an Advent wreath, but in our hearts. Romans 15:13. I pray that God, the source of hope, and we light the candle of hope. I pray that God, the source of hope, will fill you completely with joy and peace. Because you trust in him, then you will overflow with confident hope through the power of the Holy Spirit. For now, goodbye. God be with ye. And thank you for sharing the good news of this God of peace with those you encounter in this very unpeaceful world. Until next time, so long.